a participant.
All right. We've got to start now. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. You're welcome to Time to Heal's Legal Surgeries. This is week 10. This is a platform where we discuss topical issues on domestic abuse and how policymakers can better legislate and regulate these things to protect lives. The aim is to completely stamp out domestic violence and abuse. And this is brought to you by Time to Heal. Time to Heal is a registered charity. Here we're located in Aberdeen, in the northeast of Scotland, beautiful area in Scotland. So everyone who is watching, you're welcome so very much to this legal surgeries today. And everyone who has joined us here on Zoom, thank you. Special thanks to Zhaira, who is going to be our presenter today. She has graciously agreed on a very short notice to help out on this topic today. Zhaira, thank you so very much. And then thank you to Kamina for always being there, for joining us all the time. Your presence is always appreciated and your contributions. Karuna as well, thank you. You are highly appreciated. Thank you for making it today. And to our manager and founder, Reverend Abdullah Kran, thank you for giving us a platform to discuss. So today we are looking into an aspect of domestic abuse. I think today more or less it's something to just reflect on what is going on, the trends and activities and recent updates on domestic abuse and regulation. So we'll be specifically looking at new trends on domestic abuse and regulations, more or less update what is going on, what do we know, what should we be aware, and what should policymakers be aware as well. Thank you for agreeing to do justice to this, Zhaira. Zhaira is our presenter today. Please, just for housekeeping rules, everyone watching, I mean, particularly those of us on Zoom, please, let's keep our microphones muted whilst the presentation is going on. Engage, you can engage absolutely using the chat platform, put in your contributions, put in your questions, and you can also jot your questions down. There will be time for questions and answer and feedback. We want it to be as engaging and as an interactive as possible. Also, those of us watching on Facebook Live, you can host a watch party, share with your friends and loved ones who want it to go as far as possible. And yes, so this recording will be available on our Time to Heal YouTube channel for anyone who has missed it or you want to go back and watch again. So it'll be there on our YouTube channel to rewatch. So for that, let's keep our microphones muted when we were not speaking to allow the audience to speak and hear well and for clarity of recording. So having said that, we will, without wasting much time anymore, be going straight to the topic of the day, which is new trends on domestic abuse and regulation. And it's my pleasure, without measure, to welcome Zhaira, who is going to be our presenter today. Over to you, Zhaira.
Thank you. If you're just able to pop the slides up, Lawson, that's right. Okay.
That's fine.
Thank you. So today I'm just going to give a brief presentation on the new trends on domestic abuse and regulations and what kind of developments we've had, particularly during this lockdown period and the period over the coronavirus. So if we can just pop on to the next slide, we'll get started with, thank you, we'll get started with just some figures that have been released so we can get a picture of what's been going on. So you can see there from the 1st of April 2019 to the 31st of March 2020, we've had more than 1,000 offences being charged under the new Domestic Abuse Scotland Act 2018. So just to be precise on that, that's around about 1,681 cases that were reported under that new legislation, which came into force last year. And that legislation, as we know, was primarily designed to combat controlling and coercive behaviour. And following on from that, there's been around 30,718 domestic abuse charges in that same period, which is up 5.7%. And out of those, 9 out of 10 cases were prosecuted. So that's around about 92%, which is great in terms of looking at how we're tackling domestic abuse and the importance we're placing on the prosecution side of things. So just looking at sort of the first quarter of this year, we've had 17,224 domestic abuse cases that have been reported. And if you look at that compared to that figure of 30,000 from the whole year from April to March last year, you'll see that's more than half the cases that were reported, which is a bit of a concern, but we kind of know why that's been the case. We know that since lockdown has happened, since the pandemic's happened, the number of referrals and the number of cases have gone up for domestic abuse, unfortunately. We've had, in particular areas, there's been a suggestion that the lockdown has had a bit more of an effect on women on man incidents, particularly in areas like Fife. So they reported about 299 instances of women on man incidents between April and July 2020 of this year, which was a 36% increase for them. It's not all doom and gloom in the sense of figures. The government is trying to take steps to tackle domestic abuse and try and help protect victims. They denounced a £1.5 million investment for Scottish women aid and rape crisis just to help support victims. They've also been looking at our current legislation, which is what I'm going to go on to next. So if we can go on to slide 2. Thank you. So we know the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act 2018 came into force in April last year, and it primarily covers coercive behaviour, and it's actually influenced lawmakers in Hawaii to introduce a similar piece of legislation there, which is quite positive because it does show how lawmakers can be influential on a global scale in tackling this area, which is particularly difficult to legislate in because you're trying to balance a lot of people's rights whilst trying to protect the victim as well. What the COVID pandemic has highlighted for a lot of people is the importance of protecting women and children from domestic abuse. It's highlighted how limited their options are, how limited the options are for agencies such as police and landlords to become involved and help victims when they're in their own homes. And because of that limitation, it can often lead to victims feeling quite isolated, and they can often be placed at further risk of harm because there's no measures there to help them with that immediate risk. So what the government have proposed is the Domestic Abuse Protection Scotland Bill, which they introduced on the 2nd of October, but was published on the 5th of October. There's a link there on the slide so you can see what it covers. But the purpose of this bill is basically to build upon the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act with a greater focus on targeting people who are involved in coercive and controlling behaviour while taking steps to protect the victim. So essentially what that bill is doing is trying to fill a gap in the domestic abuse legislation that we've got just now, and allowing for that greater protection, to allow victims to stay within their own homes rather than having to find refuge somewhere else, which is what happens at the moment. So just to give you an idea of that, in 2019-2020, the figures showed that there were 4,832 homelessness applications submitted in Scotland because someone was fleeing violent or abusive relationships. So that accounts for 13% of all the applications for homelessness that were made, which was a 4% increase on the previous year. So this is an area that causes massive issues, and it's great to see that government are taking the initiative to put through and debate something, a bill that could potentially give greater powers to police and to landlords. So the bill itself begins by defining who is entitled to the proposed legal protections within it. It outlines the meaning of abusive behaviour and what constitutes abusive behaviour. The legislation is intended to be aimed at spouses, civil partners, and those people that are living together as though they were spouses or civil partners. It can also be applied to ex-partners and those in an intimate personal relationship with each other. The purpose of the bill, if it was enacted into legislation, will allow for that home to become a safe space again for the victim and reduce the victim's threats of becoming homeless, as well as being subject to domestic abuse. So part one of the legislation focuses more on introducing two protective measures in the form of the Domestic Abuse Protection Notice and a Domestic Abuse Protection Order. So I'll go into more information on that in a wee minute. It also covers in part two, if this bill was passed, it would allow for social landlords to end or transfer a tenancy of a perpetrator of domestic abuse to prevent the victim becoming homeless and enabling them to remain within the family home. So that's quite progressive, because at the minute landlords don't have that power, and it can be quite difficult where you've got two tenants on the lease to then take one off because there's been domestic incidents, because legally that's not something they can do at the moment. So again, as I say, this as a bill at the moment, it was only introduced and published on the 5th of October, so it does need to go through 3 stages in Parliament before it becomes law and before it can be enacted. So that part of the process can take a while. That's the only sort of downside to it, but it's good that government are looking at this and they're looking at ways that we can further protect victims of domestic abuse. So if you could just pop on to the next slide for me. Thanks. So the bill itself isn't actually extensive. The main parts I wanted to focus on was starting with section 4, which introduces a power for a senior constable, so that's someone holding the rank of an inspector or above, to make a domestic abuse protection notice in respect of an individual who's engaged in abusive behaviour towards a partner or an ex-partner. So essentially what that part of the Act would do, the senior officer would have to be satisfied that the individual, so person A, who would be the person that would be subject to the notice, they've engaged in abusive behaviour towards person B. They have to be satisfied that the domestic abuse protection order would be necessary for the protection of the individual at risk, so i.e. person B, from person A's abusive behaviour, and that the notice is required in the meantime for such protection before the court can consider whether or not to make such an order. So it's kind of like an interim measure in the meantime before it sort of formally goes to court to have it made into an order by a sheriff. When that senior officer is considering whether or not to make a notice, they should be taking into account any representations made by person A, the views of person B, and the welfare of any child that's deemed by the officer to be relevant. The thing with the domestic abuse protection notice is that it can be made without the consent of person B. So essentially that is a senior officer who's risk assessing a situation and deciding if these factors, that is taking account representations and the views of the people, whether this notice is needed to protect that individual from further harm. Again, this behaviour doesn't have to have taken place in Scotland for them to consider this notice, but I think from a practical point of view, the purpose of this bill is to protect victims within their own homes. So that's what it's really looking at there. If a notice is imposed, then you're looking at Section 7, making that a criminal offence to breach that notice. And what that would mean is similar to probably breaching your bail conditions. It's something that a sheriff could look at, and that person A would be subject to potentially up to 12 months imprisonment or a fine if they breach that notice. So if we could just move on to the next slide. So this is the things that the notice can cover. So the notice can require person A to leave the home of person B, require person A to surrender the keys to the property, prohibit person A from entering that home, prohibit person A from coming within such a distance of the home as specified in the notice, prohibit person A from excluding person B from the home, prohibit person A from approaching, contacting, or attempting to approach or contact person B, and or prohibit person A from approaching, contacting, or attempting to approach or contact any child usually residing with person B. So you'll see what can be covered in the notice, the extent of the protection that could be provided, can cover a range of circumstances, and ultimately the focus is on protecting person B and having that separation from person A. The last of the powers noted at G are actually quite unusual for legislation in terms of what we have already, just because they can potentially interfere with persons' ability to meet their parental responsibilities and rights in relation to that child. So there's issues like that that the government will have to take into account when they're looking at the legislation and how practical it would be if it were to be implemented. So there are certain requirements that the notice has to fulfil. So it has to be in writing, and it would take effect once it has been delivered to person A by a constable. As I alluded to, breach of the notice would constitute a criminal offence, and once the notice has been served, there has to be a court hearing before a sheriff, at which there would be an action for a domestic abuse protection order. Person A would be given notice of the hearing, and then they could participate in the proceedings as well. The notice that would be implemented by the constable would then cease to have effect if the sheriff implemented a protection order, or an interim domestic abuse protection order, or otherwise if the hearing was to finish. And then if we could just go into the last slide. And then the other section I wanted to highlight was Section A, which is moving on to the protection order. And again, it's only the Chief Constable that can apply for such an order. There may be discretion for other people too, but it would be primarily the Chief Constable that would do that. And in this instance, the sheriff can only make the order if he or she is satisfied that person A has engaged in the behaviour which is abusive of person B, and that such an order is necessary to protect person B from abusive behaviour by person A. Again, the sheriff would be obliged to consider the same factors as the senior constable, and would have to outline, be quite specific in the notice, so they'd have to be considering any views of person A, person B and any child that was within the home. So the order could be granted for up to 2 months, although that can be extended by a further month by the court if it's required. So essentially what that order or the notice is doing is requiring person A to do or prohibit them from doing something. So it's a wee bit more control over that home situation. almost like having the kind of orders that we have at the minute, like non-harassment orders or having bail conditions in place, but this would be a formal legal notice where there are criminal repercussions if it wasn't followed. I've not mentioned it on the slide here, but section 10 of the bill considers interim orders, which is basically when the sheriff is considering, is there anything we can do short term while I'm considering making a full decision, and whether a full order is needed. So those interim orders could last up to 3 weeks. But again, there's concerns over whether that's kind of an order of convenience, as opposed to something that is necessary. Like, should we just be making decisions quicker and granting orders where they're needed? So that's a really quick run through of the bill. It's still quite new. As I said, it's only just been introduced and it'll still have to go through the 3 stages. But in terms of Scotland tackling domestic abuse, I personally think that's a really progressive bill that will make a difference to victims in their own homes. And it's great to be able to give police and landlords powers to be able to manage a situation, because I imagine it's probably quite frustrating for them to be sitting on the sidelines and not have the legal powers to do anything about it. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions, but it'd be good to see what other people think about the bill being so new.
Thank you so much, Zara. That's really very insightful. Thank you very much. Like you rightly said, this is a new bill, and so it's very, very much understandable why we should be discussing it like this. I guess when we ask the question, why should we bother ourselves discussing something that hasn't been passed by the government? I think the relevance lies in getting to see what the core issue the government is trying to address is, and then see how we can feature in the whole process, whether or not the measure that the government is adopting or seeks to adopt is sufficient enough to protect victims and survivors of domestic abuse. But from your presentation, absolutely, I think it is a step in the right direction. It's a step in the right direction to have such bill. For those of us who are just joining now, you're welcome. And we are discussing new trends on domestic abuse and regulations in Scotland. And we just received a presentation from Zhaira, and she's just done a wonderful job giving us insight into the current legislation in Scotland. First of all, she started by giving us the statistics of domestic abuse offenses that have been charged in Scotland. She mentioned that between the period of 1st of April to 2019 to 31st of March 2020, about more than 1,000 offenses were charged under the Domestic Abuse Act, Domestic Abuse Scotland Act. So it shows an upward rise of about 5.7%. So I think in addition to that, she now mentioned that that there is a current legislation going through, current bill, not yet a legislation going through the Scottish Parliament, and it's called Domestic Abuse Protection Scotland Bill. It seeks to do certain things which we have looked into the slide. So one of the things that was highlighted that the bill seeks to do is to extend the protection available right now to the domestic abuse victims. It introduces 2 measures according to Zhaira, and one of which, I stand to be corrected, is a protection, the introduction of protection notice and domestic abuse protection order. So it's also worth mentioning that the part 2, according to her, says that it allows for transfer of tenancy if the situation becomes so critical. So it is very important. My personal view is that the bill is a step in the right direction and is a welcome development. But I want to hear from us what others think, and what others think about whether or not the bill is sufficient, or whether there are things that the government needs to take notice of. First of all, we've got a comment from Kamina, I think. She says that it should be good that victims won't have to flee their homes and can be made a safe home again. So I guess essentially she's saying that it would be good that victims are not made to flee their homes because of domestic abuse situations. Because if you've lived your life, you've got the home it comes with your memories, it comes with everything, and then that if the place can be made safe again. What do we think? I think I agree with you that it would be good that the victim doesn't have to flee the home. You're right, but at the point of the abuse, I think on the scale of priority, the life and safety of the victim, it should be paramount. And so whatever it will take to ensure that the victim is safe, the victim lives, and the victim is not consistently victimized, I think that should be prioritized. And then the second stage will now be how to restore safety and peace at home. Like you rightly said, if it's a home, imagine, for example, if the property belongs to the woman or the person, the victim, and it's your own property, it's your own home, or you have a joint or mutual interest in the property, it would be a loss. Even if life has been restored, it would be a loss to the victim if he or she doesn't have to reap the benefit of the home anymore. But you're right, safety, restoration of safety to the home, it's another aspect. But let me hear what others have to say. I guess one of my questions would be, if whilst we're waiting to hear from others, one of my questions is that you mentioned, I want to talk about I want to talk more about the protection notice that the police constable under Section 4, a senior constable has the power to make a domestic abuse protection notice. What I mean is, the bill is still in the process. What are the parameters? What are the things that will trigger this process? Are there things that ought to be in place before a police constable can give the protection notice, or is it just at the discretion of the police constable?
Wasn't quite outlined in the bill what the situation would have to be, but I think that's probably because each incident will be quite different. I imagine that they'll have to apply it to the sort of facts and circumstances of that case and sort of justify why that notice is needed. So it could be a case, you know, that they've had several reports of domestic incidents and they think that warrants having a notice. Or it might be that they've had one serious, like it never really specified in the bill, which is maybe something that they'll talk about as it goes through the stages in Parliament. But yeah, I imagine like there'd be some discretion for officers because they're usually quite experienced in handling these sort of things.
Okay, that's right. I agree with you that it has to be a reasonable man's test. There must have been some incidences. There has to be some level of evidence, some level of proof that will necessitate that. At times, apprehension alone could also lead to that. But again, like you said, it's part of the bill examination. So one would think that by the time the bill is eventually passed, the more clarity will be restored. I mean, will be given on what parameters will be. So excuse me, what considerations will be in place before the senior constable can have the power to make a domestic abuse protection notice? Because as good as it sounds, you don't want to give so much power to someone who can eventually abuse it. The aim is good, the intention is pure and is good, but that has to be balanced properly. So I think that's right. I think I see a comment from, yeah, so Holly has just commented that it might be based on MARAC order, which assesses level of safety. If you don't mind, if do you want to shed more light on what you mean by MARAC? That's MARAC order.
Yeah, that's cool. Sorry, I don't even realize. I don't even know why I was posting on the chat then, because I definitely can speak. So the MARAC, a MARAC order, a MARAC assessment, assesses a victim's, I guess, vulnerability and possibility of anything right up to murder. So it's a slightly separate unit within the police who specialise in domestic abuse, murder and rape. And they will often be referred certain cases to do a MARAC assessment. So where police officers might be called out to a number of domestic incidents at one address, they will do a safety, I can't remember the name of the assessment that they do there and then when the police officers attend. But if there are a number of them, they will pass it on to the MARAC unit, who will then assess basically whether there's a kind of threat to life eventually, because it's all based on it's all based on the idea that it will always escalate, and if that person is continuously exposed to this perpetrator, it will eventually end in death or serious harm. And they assess they're kind of separate to the police, but they do sit within the police, so whatever they say has higher authority over what's done with domestic abuse incidents and how they're dealt with. I'm not overly familiar with it, but I hope that's kind of explained it a little bit.
Thank you so much. It does sound to me that you're very familiar with it, with the response you just gave. So I think that helps a lot. Really, it's important to know that there is something called MARAC order, and I suspect, like you rightly said, that they may have to be working together with whoever the constable will be to elicit basic facts and evidence that will now necessitate the domestic abuse protection order. I think it is good. It is good to know that such mechanisms are in place. I think what worries me, I'm not worried in that sense, but it's a flip side of thought. Looking at the current figures that you just said, posted, at about 30,718 domestic abuse charges were recorded, up to 5.7% rise. It is a positive thing that they have been charged and been taken to redress process. The flip side of it also is that it shows the prevalence of this, or the rate of occurrence of these issues. So if you have about 30,000 plus charges, it shows the spate of domestic abuse. Is that something to worry about? Do we want to wait? Does the government have to wait until the time when you have to charge perpetrators, or we have to look at what are these issues that are necessitating this abuse? I don't know if that question makes sense. We have 30,000 persons. I mean, 30,000 charges have been recorded. It means there were incidences of about 30-something thousand incidences of domestic abuse cases, but they've been charged. Is there a thing that can be done? Is there a legislation that can be put in place, or policy that can be put in place that would reduce the number of charges up to court? In my mind, I wouldn't want to record high incidences of cases being charged in court, not because I don't want cases to go to court, but I don't want the thing that will necessitate that incident in court. Does it make sense?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Sorry, Lawson.
Okay, I will try and rephrase it if I can. I mean, okay,
maybe somebody else would be able to help me out, and maybe they understand, but I'm just not sure.
I think I understand what he's trying to say is, since there are so many cases going on, I believe I understand. So it's basically, it's good that the cases are going in the court, but what can be done to actually not let these cases happen, like the abuse? How can we reduce the abuse in the first place, so that there is cases in the first place? So I think that's what you meant, Lawson?
Yeah, that's correct. You're right that what can be done to make sure that it does not happen at all. You're right, actually.
Yeah, I
So
think again it is different scenarios. I think education, making people aware. Again, because of the strict rules, if it is an offense now, people are more scared and more conscious of their actions. So if there are rules, there is it's an offense. So they are more aware that if they did this, then obviously there is a consequence to it. So that is another way where it could be. It is a right way to have a legal support system where the criminal, the victims are protected, and the criminals or the people who are causing domestic abuse are aware that if I do something wrong, I will be punished for it. So I
yeah,
mean, if
yeah,
people
yeah,
were so educated, so people were so fine, we would really not be in a situation, which is a shame. But it's
yeah.
just so many reasons which has led to this: alcohol, uh, poverty. I mean, it's just difficult to say. Maybe someone wants to add.
You're right. Yes. Go on, please.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I think maybe it's a bit of a difficult area because it's not an offence that's like, for instance, if you've got somebody that commits petty theft constantly because they're trying to feed an addiction, you can address that because you can get them support for that addiction and try and get to the root cause of it. Or somebody that's maybe experienced trauma and fell into a cycle of crime for that reason. So I think it's kind of like with domestic abuse, it's slightly different, because I mean there's probably instances where people have experienced trauma or addiction and things which have led to their behaviour, but it's such a different kind of criminal activity to what you would normally see. So I think the right way to go is, unfortunately, to put them through court and just have that sort of tough stance on, we're not accepting this. And as Karina said, like having a bit more education and just making people aware of what's going on and what steps people are taking to tackle it.
You're right. Absolutely, both of you are correct on that. So I think it's like you said. It's domestic abuse it's on a different pedestal of its own. It's just something that is uniquely bad, and the perpetrators are. You will need to really dig deep, and like you said, deterrence through court process is one thing. So what I can read from this, anyone looking at the record number of domestic abuse charges will know that, oh, this is a serious matter and the court is interested. The government is taking this serious. If they can charge as high as this number, it means that no one can literally go scot-free. So that would be the positive thing, that the court is really, really involved and they're taking this as serious as possible. But again, whatever can be done to ensure, which is where the education comes in, whatever can be done behind the scene before court to educate people to remove before it gets critical, to educate people on the evils of domestic abuse and the consequences that will arise thereof. That should be done, and done early enough. You're right. I think one comment is here. We have a comment on the page. Kamina says that it's for them to follow rules to help DA to be, that is domestic abuse, I guess that's what you mean, to follow the rules to help domestic abuse to be zero tolerance. So I guess what you're trying to say is that the rules have to put a zero tolerance approach to domestic abuse. You're right. There has to be a zero tolerance approach to it. Also, Holly has just updated us that she just found more information on Maroc referrals. That's the police perform a dash assessment, and if there is serious concern, they will refer the case to Maroc, and there's a website there, a link. Thank you very much, Holly, for that link. Thank you everyone who is contributing. That's really helpful. I will copy the link and then we share with us subsequently. So thank you, everyone. Again, are there things that we should look into that we haven't touched at all in the presentation? I will go to the next slide. The other one that talks about the protection, domestic abuse protection Scotland bill. And for those of us who are just coming, that's the new bill that we're discussing. And then this is just a brief rundown of what the bill entails to extend protections available to those at risk of domestic abuse. Part 1 introduces 2 measures: domestic abuse protection notice and a domestic abuse protection order, and then allows for transfer of tenancy. So a little bit on the tenancy part, how I'm not asking detailed information because it's still a bill. What can you talk a little bit more on this transfer of tenancy? How does that happen? Does the landlord play a role in that, or will it have to be done by the victim? How does it operate?
Again, it was quite vague in the bill about that, like how that would sort of come about. They just more talked about the landlord having that power to be able to transfer the tenancy where there's 2 people on the tenancy agreement, to be able to transfer that to, say, person A, or person B, to allow them to stay within the home rather than them having to leave and give up that right to be within the home. So sorry, I can't give you more information.
That's fine.
Just because it's so new, there'll be loads of things like this that they'll talk about. And as it progresses, they'll hopefully build on things like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's absolutely understandable. It's a new bill, and I guess what would be worth mentioning, perhaps for policymakers, is the aspect that Kamina pointed out, that yes, it's good to transfer tenancy, move away from the property, that we have to also put in measures. The legislation should put in place measures that can restore safety and peace, so that if the victim wishes to come back, the place is not, the place is essentially safe for the victim to come back, especially if you have children, if you have people that are related to you who want to have safety back. So yeah, I think that's true. We keep an eye on this, and everyone as well. Let's keep our eyes on this, and then when public notices are put across for feedback and comments on views, because I'm aware that the public can also contribute to the bill passing process, comment, feedback, and things that the government should be aware of in the process of legislation would be highly welcome. Or you have comments after the legal surgery today, you have some things that you remembered and you now want us as an organization to table before the Scottish government, please do not hesitate to let us know. We'll be happy to pass that across. So does anyone have any other questions, maybe comments on this, anything at all that we should be aware or discuss on latest trends on domestic abuse? What are the things that you are coming across right now? Especially now that most part of some parts of, or let's say some parts of England, I mean, Scotland is relatively safer in terms of this COVID-19 lockdown. Now that lockdown measures are still being tightened up gradually, we don't want to relapse into that kind of scenario where we saw a hike or a spike in the number of domestic abuse incidences during the national lockdown. So have we learned from the national lockdown? Has the government learned enough from the national lockdown? And what can be done to ensure that, if at all, these lockdown measures are continuously tightened? What can be done to protect the victims and survivors through this period? Anything that you have in mind would be welcome.
I'd just like to say the government is trying to update everything within the law, because now you have smartphones and that they're going to try and push through a law where the victim will be safer from the other person tracking them down. So like you're saying, you know, a lot of refugees are filled in that, and if they've escaped from their own home, there's going to be a law where the person that is tracking them on the phone will be committing a crime.
Okay, yeah, that's right. I think, yeah, that's a very good aspect. It's sort of, I don't want to call it test and trace system, but a kind of tracking device. There will be an electronic, like you said, electronic measures have been looked into to see how victims can be supported during this time. Thank you, Kamina, for that contribution. Thank you. So yeah, so that's the sort of presentation we have today. Thank you so much, Zhaira, for your presentation. Just to recap what we did today, we discussed, Zhaira presented new trends on domestic abuse and regulations, and she introduced the current figures, as you can see on the screen, that are currently, that we have received on domestic abuse incidences, that between 1st of April to 31st of March, over 1,000 offenses were charged under the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act, and then the incidences of charges about 30,718. And then we also have other domestic abuse statistics there on the screen. If you wish to go back and look at them properly as well. Then she touched on the new bill called Domestic Abuse Protection Scotland Bill. The link to accessing the bill is there on the website. The main purpose is to extend protections available to those at risk of domestic abuse. And then you can see the skeletal rundown of what the bill does or envisages to do. Part 1 introduces 2 measures: abuse protection notice and a domestic abuse protection order, as well as it allows for transfer of tenancy. She highlighted section 4 that that a senior constable is empowered to give a domestic abuse protection notice. More details on how this power will be exercised, I suppose, will be given in due notice, in due course rather. And then section 7 makes breach of this notice a criminal offense. So then she also highlighted the domestic abuse protection notice, and the notice can be the following on the screen. You can see the different ways that the notice can be made. Then section 8 concerns, the court process involved in domestic abuse protection order and all the rest. So that sort of wraps up the presentation that Zhaira has given us today, and then further information available on the screen. In addition to that, like she has rightly said, I just want to highlight that Time to Heal is here. We always are available to render support to victims and survivors. So if you know anyone who is in need, who is in apprehension at all, and has any sort of need in this regard, please do not hesitate to talk to them. That help support is available here and in Time to Heal. And I'm sure as well, Women Alliance, represented by Kamina, can also be of help. There's always support for every situation. So again, thank you very much, Zhaira, for your presentation, and thank you everyone who has been engaging with your contributions. Holly, thank you so much. Thank you, Karuna, and thank you everyone. I don't know whether anyone has some last comments, few closing remarks before we wrap up for the day. Anything that you want to add? Okay. I think Reverend Abiola Crown is just joining back now. I think I will try. Yes. Oh, yes. So if there are no other comments or feedback, please do always check back on our YouTube channel, check up on our Facebook, and then check on all our activities. We always update them from time to time. The legal surgeries hold every Saturday, 12 noon to about 1:30. Unless something changes, then we reschedule it for another time. But so far, so good. It's on Saturday. and huge appreciation to the legal support team for always being there to help, to reach out to everyone. Thank you so very much, Holly. Thank you very much, Zara. Thank you, Karuna. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I would ask Reverend Adola Kran whether she has 1 or 2 comments to pass across to us as we are just closing for the day.
I was not joining anyway.
Oh, okay.
I've been in the meeting. I was just joining from another device.
Oh, okay, all right. So
I don't know where this echo is coming from now. Thank you, everyone. Sorry. Just give me a minute.
Yeah, I think it's clear now. I've muted one of the devices.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And we're very, very much grateful, especially to our presenter for today. It can never be overemphasized that it takes a lot of time to put these materials together. We are very, very grateful. Please enjoy your week and obey the rules. Don't let the government catch you so that we can remain safe. Yes. Have a great weekend.
Thank you so much, Ma.
Thank you very much, Lawson, for consistently, diligently putting this together. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you, Zara. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so very much. And please, like Mommy said, let's obey the social distancing rules. Wear your face masks, wash your hands clean, and enjoy the time.
Unless you want to go to Africa with me.
Yes, please.
If people should ask her to give you some African dishes, ask her when she's going. She brings some African delicacies. So. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming, and then hope to see us next weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.